Cryptids seem to terrify everyone no matter where you live in the world. Today, these subscribers sent in their allegedly true experiences with what they call cryptid creatures. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, be sure to send it in at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this show going. Now, without further ado, let's get into these allegedly true cryptid stories. I wanted to tell you about my Bigfoot encounter. It happened on July 21st of 1979 at South Umpqua Falls in Oregon. It was on Saturday. My two cousins and I drove to Medford, about 40 miles south of Umpqua Falls. We were going to spend the day swimming and just hanging out. It was a fantastic day that was both warm and quiet. We were the only three people there. We were sliding down the little waterfall into the little natural-made pool below it. The water was very cold but perfect for a hot day. When we got too cold, we'd get out of the water and sit at the only picnic table and warm up in the sunshine. Umpqua River is between two mountain ranges in that area. Anyway, all afternoon I had a very strong feeling we were being watched. I asked one of my cousins if he felt that way too, and he said yes, it was probably a fisherman up the river somewhere. At about 7, we decided to make a fire and roast some hot dogs and marshmallows. We were just talking, enjoying being out of town and into nature. After about an hour or so, it started getting dark. If you look at the sky, it was still light. Next to the river where we were, it was getting dark, as we were between two mountains. One of my cousins said that they were going to spend the night there, and that they brought an extra sleeping bag in case I decided to stay too. They rolled out their sleeping bags next to the fire and put more logs on the fire, and I crawled into their sleeping bag. They fell asleep quite fast. I was still sitting at the picnic table trying to decide if I wanted to stay and sleep on the hard ground or drive the 40 miles back to Medford to sleep in my comfortable bed. As I was thinking about what I wanted to do, the hair on my arms went straight up. Suddenly, the most putrid smell I've ever smelled in my life, like a ripe rotting corpse, met my nostrils. It was so strong and so sudden. I looked down at my cousins to see if they were awakened by the awful smell. I couldn't imagine anyone being able to sleep with that strong of a horrible smell. I put my hand over my mouth and nose. My hair was still standing straight up, and I thought that there must be something sneaking up behind me. I turned around to see what it was. I was thinking of a deer, bear, maybe a mountain lion. As it turned out, there was nothing there. So I turned back around, and this 10-foot hairy man was standing next to a pine tree about 20 feet in front of me. He wasn't there before, and was now slightly swaying. When he saw he had my attention, he stopped swaying. I was absolutely terrified. I now knew where the awful smell was coming from. The fire was so bright I could see him perfectly. I had heard of Bigfoot before, but it was one of those things where you have to see it to believe it. There was a huge one standing right in front of me. I was shaking so bad I've never been that scared before. He was closer to my cousin by about 5 feet. They didn't wake up somehow though. He was just looking at them and then back at me. He had an egg-shaped head, no neck, and I didn't see any ears. His shoulders were massive. I'm 5'3", and I'll bet they were at least as wide as I am tall. His arms were long, and he had hands, not paws or claws, but hands and feet. To this day, I'm still shocked at what I saw, but I'll leave you with this. Seeing is truly believing. Hello, Swamp Dweller. This is going to be long since I'm telling you almost all my paranormal encounters I've had in my life so far. I promise you that everything I'm about to tell you is true. I want to address you before, but I had no time and I was lazy when I did. These stories are 100% true and happened to me in a special portion of my life. I always had some kind of affinity with the paranormal. When I was a teenager, I wouldn't stop writing extremely dark, creepy poetry. I've always been a loner. One best friend kind of person, if any. Anyways, my parents were divorced when I was young, so I became depressed and spent a lot of time alone. We moved in with my grandpa and grandma shortly after the divorce, and they gave us a little house near them. It was so close that we didn't have to walk 5 meters to reach the other door. My mom always spent time there with them when I preferred to be alone in our new little house. One time, I was sleeping in the dark there, and I dreamed that there was a guy with a black face sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at me. I woke up terrified, and something felt dreadful within me. It was just a feeling that someone was there with me. I jumped up, turned on the light, and ran to my grandpa's house. I sat beside my grandma and said, "That house can be so creepy." To my terror, she said, "Of course, 2 guys died there from gas. They were renting the place and we found them dead a week later." She said it like it was a casual thing. I took it as a slap to my face back then. That was sadly only a warm-up of things to come. I was so young then, so this was terrifying for me as an experience. Another time after I got older and my mom remarried, my grandpa moved to another house of his 150 meters of our previous one. This meant I was left to rot in the old one, living alone for an entire year and a half, in which I stayed in a big, old, and creepy place. Even though their new house wasn't too far from me, I still found it off-putting being alone in that place. I saw stuff there I never saw again. Shadow people was one example. I remember avoiding most areas in that house. My living consisted of staying in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. The reason was that I was always getting this eerie feeling. I felt like I was being watched no matter where I was in the house, and those were kind of like my safe zones. I was a student finishing my graduation product, so I didn't leave the house that much, except for buying my groceries. There were 2 long hallways in the house. The first led to the bathroom and the second led to my previous grandparents' room. It was a big room and had always been locked since they left. It was this way because they kept all their stuff still in there. When you stood still in the hallway, you could not see the door at the end of it. It was like an endless hallway of darkness, even during the daytime. I avoid that area the most. Somehow, you start feeling when something is wrong in these situations. I would always hear banging on the door very late at night, around 2 or 3 a.m. I would brush it off and play courageous since I had no choice. I had to stay in that house or else I had nowhere to live. I was used to locking the door of the living room, turning the TV on, and trying to sleep every night. The door didn't lock well, so I used a chair. One night, I was so sick, I woke up burning with a fever and almost hallucinating. That's when I heard the chair moving. This is when I first saw them. A small, dark, shadowy figure, literally sneaking a peek on me, like a kid trying to peek from the door. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got up, switched the lights on, and looked. The chair had moved out of its place, leaving the door slightly open. I started crying and I called both my mom and dad, but none of them answered. It was around 3 or 3:30 in the morning, so I prayed and calmed down, convincing myself that I imagined it all. 2 months later, I was watching a video about jinns on YouTube with loudspeakers around that afternoon. For those who don't know, jinns are a creature in the Islamic religion equivalent to demons. It was entitled 30 Facts You Didn't Know About Jinns. The last fact stated that jinns were living with us, and one of them is probably watching you right now as you are watching this video about them. I giggled and said I'm not scared, but I knew I would regret it later. That same night, I did some Quran readings, and it's supposed to keep the shadow people and jinns away as per my religion. I kid you not, at 2 a.m., I woke up to 3 of shadowy people dancing. One of them was at my feet, another was at my bed, and the third one was standing at my face. They were making some kind of noise that I cannot explain. Something like static noise, but not as obvious as that. The sound was so annoying to me that I screamed. I was pissed and kept saying, "Leave me alone. All I want to do is sleep in peace." And they left just like that. It was now empty and calm. Soon after, I was suffering from insomnia and I couldn't sleep anymore at night. I would spend the night studying, finishing my project, cooking, watching TV, playing my video games, and drifting to sleep around 6 in the morning when daylight starts peaking. One time, I got to sleep and started dreaming. The dream was so real it felt like I didn't go to sleep in the first place. I started hearing some kind of whispering, but not gentle whispering. I don't know how to explain it, but it was violent, like a chorus from hell. I don't know if you've ever played Dante's Inferno, but the closest description would be the chorus in the soundtracks from that game. So quiet, yet so loud, evil and aggressive. I would wake up to hear it still playing in my ear, always at the same time. Eventually, a time came where this was different. I was still dreaming. I stood up to go see the source of that sound, to find out that it was in the creepy room at the end of the hallway, which probably became haunted because it wasn't open for too long. I got closer there, to see a man emerging from the darkness. He was one man, but it felt like he was followed by 100. He was bold, short, and had big muscular arms. I could see the veins in them. He looked right through my soul while he came my way. I started reciting the Quran in his face, when at the same time I heard my cousin screaming at the stairs of the house on my left. They were telling me to get out of there. The door was opposite to me on my left, so I started moving, but it was a struggle. It felt like something was pulling me from the other way. I made it through, opened the door, and got out of the grip of grasping for air. I know this would sound insane. I thought this thing would not chase me out of this house. It's my residence, and if somebody has to go, it would be them and not me. I go back inside and started reciting. The creepy man fell back in slow motion like a freaking video game going backward. Then I woke up to that whispering in my ear again. After some time, my grandma fought with my grandpa and came to stay for a bit. At first, we both slept in the living room. She always kept a light on at night. I woke up feeling weird and I found two things in front of me. It was like a giant little girl holding something on her left arm. She had the whitest eyes I'd ever seen. She grinned at me, tilting her head, and was staring right through me. She was holding hands with some kind of dwarf-like guy who had a tail and grayish skin. He was looking at my grandma, but I had enough at this point, so I just went back to sleep ignoring them. I was afraid of all these dreams for a long time, and honestly, it took a long time for me to get over them. I don't really know if you count jinns as cryptids, but I do appreciate you sharing my story. So this took place in December of 2018. For some backstory, my ex and I take our mastiff puppy to a park for a walk every day. If I get out to work late, we still go, even if it's 11 p.m. He is our baby, and walking him is the highlight of our day. He was 18 months at the time, about 190 pounds and not afraid of anything. This night we got to the park at around 10:30 p.m. and the park and the layout as follows. The parking lot leading to the park was the police station sitting on the right-hand side and a gazebo on the left-hand side of the parking lot. There's a lake in the center, and the left-hand side is an empty field which is on the side where the gazebo is, and the right-hand side is a playground. At the top of the park has a gated dog park, followed by thick woods. The lake or pond is really no more than a half-circle mile. The most people just walk the decorated and paved footpath around the lake. The lake has a large family of ducks and geese living in it, and when you start to walk around and go too close to the water, the big male goose usually stretches his wings out to let you know this is close enough, and the flock normally looks to see if you have bread or corn for them. We always greet the ducks, then beeline it to the gated dog park and let our dog loose. That night, the ducks didn't quack or make any noise. At the time, we didn't even realize that and just headed to the dog park. As we entered and started to play, we were there for maybe half an hour and noticed our dog not playing the way he usually does. He stayed by our side and did a few laps around the fence every so often, staring into the darkness of the thick woods and letting out a low growl. He then oddly just sat down by the gate as if he was ready to leave. I found this odd because I was enjoying myself a lot and really needed the fresh air to unwind from the day. My ex motioned us to go and whispered, Let's go quick." As we left the park and we started walking to the car, I noticed how still and silent the park was. It's that kind of silence that makes you unnerved and feels like there's something wrong. As we get close to the parking lot, I notice that all the ducks and geese hover together in a giant ball. Normally they sleep in a long line along the pond, all the way to the playground. They didn't that night. I've never seen them all hovering in one tight group and be dead silent. My ex said, "Did you hear that too?" I asked, "Hear what?" He said, "That growl that came from the woods." I thought it was the dog, he said. No, I was looking at him and I heard it, and it definitely came from behind me. As I glanced over the water, the street lamp gives a few feet of light and I saw something black about the size of a person. It then becomes really tiny like a rabbit, and then goes under the bushes surrounding a garbage can. As we hung out by the gazebo that is directly next to the parking lot, we heard a rather unusual sound coming from the left side, where the pitch black empty field is. It sounded like claws being dragged on gravel parts. My dog lowered his head and he looked through the planks of the gazebo and started sniffing the air really loud. He then yanked us back to the car. I was spooked at that point because our dog is not afraid of anything. He can throw his weight around, and though he's still a growing puppy, he has a mean temper and he protects us from anybody. But even he knows when it's best to leave if this creature's there. Now, in the last few months, we have had some similar experiences. We believe a shapeshifter or skinwalker inhabits the area. It seems to switch from a human-like shape to an animal-like shape and does not like to be disturbed at night. Whatever that creature is, it sure commands respect and we give it space. We since then picked a new place for late-night walks. Some background to the story. My family and I were planning a camping trip in the Cascade Mountains in Washington State for a week back in 2013. We weren't at a campground, but we had just hiked a few miles and found a good spot near the river. The first few days were normal enough, but on the 5th day, I left by the campground to go collect some firewood. I went a little further than I was supposed to, so I knew I was taking a risk of getting lost. On my way back to the campground, I noticed a very weird deer or moose stalking me. The reason I thought it might have been a moose is that its head had to at least be 7 feet off the ground because its head was taller than I was. I could see it reaching the lower branches of the pine trees. I was starting to get a little freaked out because I hadn't seen a single deer or moose the whole time we were here. I started to walk a little faster back to where the campsite was, which had to be at least 2 miles away. I started to run, and as I was running, just trying to get back to the campsite, I heard these very loud footsteps about 40 feet behind me. As I turned around to see what it was, I saw that this thing was no deer. It had a head like a deer, but it was way too messed up to be a deer. It had blood on its teeth and a weird man-like body, but it was so skinny that you could see its ribcage. It also had legs like a deer or a dog that were bent back. As soon as I saw that thing, I ran as fast as my legs would take me. This thing was gaining on me quickly. I knew it was going to catch me, so I felt I had to hide. I soon found a log to hide behind to catch my breath. Once I caught my breath, I started running again, but this time it was right behind me. I could feel its hot breath on my neck. I was getting close to the campsite when this thing tried to grab me. It missed, but it left deep scratch marks on my back. I stopped about a half-mile away from the campsite, but I didn't stop running. I kept going until I got to the campsite. I told my mom and dad what happened, and they didn't believe me. That night I didn't sleep, and the next day we left and I never went to camp in the Cascade Mountains ever again. I'll start off by saying no, this isn't my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends, through the years, to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard about this dog-wolf story. I have since asked each friend, over years and miles apart, and they all remember the same encounter. Before my ex was even my boyfriend, let's call him Jay, he and our friends were about 17 or 18 years of age. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike to blank and puff. Ah, good old days, when we got away from our parents and planned a day around smoking. It was Jay and his best friend B, and their girlfriends S and M. The four of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's in nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and know exactly what trail they were on. They were on the main trail that connects the parking lot to the river. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked to the river. On the way to the river from the lot, there is a very small bridge that crosses a small creek. This will be relevant for later. The group spent the day out there, swimming and puffing and swimming, just the typical Oregonian teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours, as the sun began to set. Either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. So they walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot. This path has since been paved according to Google Maps. It doesn't take more than about 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot that they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached this small footbridge near the parking lot, B looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain and noticed a huge dog near the tree line, about 100 yards away. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just like some humongous friendly dog. It was about to get dark, but from M's and J's descriptions and the drawing she did for me later in 2005, it was very shaggy and furry. I may even still have that notebook where she drew the dog thing if I can find it. I'll definitely send it to you. My friends continued to walk across this small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer than they would have seen it just a couple of seconds earlier. It had traversed most of the large field in mere seconds it took them to get across the 10-foot-long bridge. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and stealthy. My four friends ran to the car and they had the classic cliche, "I can't get the key in" moment, because B was fumbling madly for the keys. At this point, the dog was standing on its legs at the very edge of the parking lot, just looking at them or something of that sort. It still had a dog face, still had the dog body, but it was standing up. They never saw it walking on all four, just two. It was like every time they looked up, it was just standing there, a little closer. As I had said, every time they looked up, this thing was closer and closer, but it never looked like it was moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs, towering at that height. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again in intervals in the field, but that's the way they described it. Many times I asked them, Are you sure it wasn't a bear? No, it definitely was a dog standing on hind legs. A big dog that was stalking them. Also, this is in Lane County, Oregon, in the year of 2000. There are few, if any, bears out there. It would be odd, but then again, I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pisgah dog to his own business. I have never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't like to talk about the incident at all because it's too creepy for her to recall. What do you guys think? Is this some sort of dogman in Oregon? I don't know. I was in my car one day heading towards a campsite. It was just me, my mom, and my brother. When we arrived, it was pouring heavy rain and it felt very cold. I also felt as if I was being watched. In the woods, this isn't an uncommon feeling, but this felt different. It didn't feel like an animal was watching me. It felt like something else. I kept looking towards the trees and I felt something watching me the whole time as we were putting up the tent. When it stopped raining, my brother wanted me to come and explore in the woods with him, but I was very nervous. I eventually got the courage to go with him. We were halfway through the woods and I heard a crackling sound behind me in the trees. At first I thought it was my brother, but he was in front of me. I turned around, and to my horror, there was a thing gazing upon me. It was very skinny and deformed looking. It was almost like a deformed looking gray-haired wolf. I wanted to run, but I just for some reason couldn't. I was frozen in place. I just stared into its greenish eyes while my brother kept taunting me to go. There was something very off about this creature that kept me fixated on it. It was much larger than any normal wolf. It just stared at me at first, but then it stood on two legs, and that's when I knew something was wrong, because I was pretty sure wolves could not do that. My brother ran first, and then I eventually ran behind him. I didn't once look back, but when we returned to my camp, my brother told me that it could have been a skinwalker or maybe some sort of wendigo. I didn't know what that was, so I searched it up on my phone. But as I learned quickly, these things are awful. It didn't 100% meet what we saw, but it could be. I was so terrified, and after profuse begging, I was blessed with my request to go home. The vision of that deformed thing still haunts me to this day. If anybody has any idea of what this thing could be, please comment down below letting me know. And thank you, Swamp, for sharing my story. Thanks for listening to these allegedly true creepy cryptid stories. These were some really interesting encounters if I do say so myself. I know I wouldn't want to be running into any deformed looking bipedal woods in the woods. Personally, I wonder why it seems so many of these alleged cryptids are deformed or decaying in some way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to start a conversation about this and see what all you guys think. If you have a story you would like to share on a future episode, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. If you are on the go and don't have YouTube Premium, you can now download your favorite scary stories from the swamp on anchor.fm. You can also download and stream Swamp Dweller Scary Stories on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many more. There's never a dull moment in the swamp, and there's always scares to be had. Thank you guys so much for supporting the swamp as you do. It's insane to see that we are 25 episodes into this cryptid series. Never would I have thought we would have gotten this far. Cheers to 25 more. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.